Hello, this is Patrick. Okay, oh, sorry, just testing if it's working. Okay, I think we'll get started. Got a laser pointer. Welcome, everyone. This is UI plus programming, because BFFS4EVA. Oops. Okay, just seeing if that works. So, welcome to my talk. Thanks, everyone, for being here. It's nice to see so many people. In my UI design career, I have spent the most time collaborating with programmers. So together we're going to explore a workflow that improves your technical knowledge and builds cadence so that you too can be BFFs forever with programmers. I just want to do a check of the audience. How many people here work as a programmer? Oh boy, okay. How many people are in UI artist or designer? Okay, those of you that are in UI, how many of you are already besties with your programmers? Okay, all right. You don't need to flex. So today we're going to learn about this shape. It is the shape I saw when I was thinking about this talk, so I hope it will make sense for you, and if it doesn't, that's okay too. I want to start today's session with a little background info on why this talk exists and who I am. So my name is Amila Nuhodzic, and my experience in game development started as a student back in 2015, studying video game art, primarily in 3D, but also developing my 2D, digital, and also traditional skills. I very quickly realized that 3D was not it for me, and I knew that my 2D art skills were not concept artist level. But by the last year of my program, I realized that UI designers exist, and I immediately knew that was for me. So I really like trying a lot of things. I love learning, but I did have to hustle that final year to create a UI-focused portfolio. But also that final year, a very special relationship developed between me as a UI designer and all the programmers on my teams that I worked with. I loved working with them, and I loved learning from them, and I loved growing my technical skills. That relationship with programmers continued throughout my career, regardless of whether I was in a small team with just a few people or a team of 80. So I don't regret to inform you I've made a tiny career change yet again because I love learning and I love doing a lot of things. These two gifts summarize me very well because sometimes I can juggle a lot of things and handle it, but other times I fumble and I'm like, why can't I just do one thing? So currently I'm a producer and co-founder of Moon Candy. We're working on our first title, which we call Last Mile Planet, and it's an off-road vehicle combat game where you've got 5 days to escape a doomed planet. Here's a little sneak peek of concept art, and I still do UI work on this team, but it's more on the integration side within Unity. And I'm not a programmer, a UI programmer yet, but I'm open to learning as our product lead Izzy has a programming task for me once I return. And the other experience I'm going to reference today is my time on Jurassic World Alive. This game was in live ops when I joined the team, and we were releasing new content every 4 to 5 weeks, which was exciting but also pretty exhausting. My favorite thing about working on this project, though, was working with all the different designers and programmers on each feature, because I got to learn a lot from them, which you'll see is the theme for this talk. I'm also going to be referencing Unity. That's the main engine that I work in, but this workflow hopefully should be applicable regardless of the engine you're working in. So let's begin exploring, and the first step here is to question everything. So, you ever just receive a scene or a prefab, and it looks like the UI game objects were just like shoved in there without a care in the world? I've received some things like that. And then I'd have to rename things to follow the conventions we'd set, or reparent things, or reset layouts and anchor points, because things weren't properly set together. And then I would hand it back to the programmer to make it work. So that was an experience I had on Jurassic World Alive, and it may have been because this is how we developed our live ops features in waterfall development. So designers ideated and led features, programmers implemented, UI integrated, QA tested it, and then ta-da, it ships. Except that's not how it actually worked, and it felt a lot more like this, especially if there were changes I wanted to make that needed approval. I also feel like we didn't have the space to collaborate and iterate on features before release. There's a time and place for waterfall development, but when it comes to creating new content and integrating it with the old, we needed to move a little bit differently. And I think the frustrating part here was something bigger than prefabs not being set up in an efficient way. It was other developers not having a seat at the table, which resulted in a lot of back and forth, unproductive siloing, and indirect communication. Basically, you were given a design document and told to go forth. On every project I've worked on, I've questioned everything, and it has ended in a great way, I promise you. But this also means to question why something was set up the way it was, because one, you can learn something from it by questioning and understanding why it was done that way, or two, you can improve it. So, coming back to this example, by questioning how we worked, I was able to make a positive culture shift to get UI a seat at the table much earlier on, which reduced a lot of the frustration I experienced with feature development. So what if integration started with the UI team? UI already does the wireframes, the mock-ups. Why not also integrate that work into the engine? I'm removing a step and removing workload from my teammate. Why is this innovative at all? It really isn't. I actually think it should be the norm. I believe that anyone who makes assets for a game should know how to integrate it if you want to become BFFS4EVA with your programmers. So what if instead of working like this, we worked like this? What if we moved in a way that supports better relationships with our fellow developers? So we'll now take a look at a feature from Last Mile Planet so I can show you some examples of what I mean. Here's an in-progress video of the current iteration of planning mode, and just to give you a context of what this feature is, it's a combat state you enter where time is slowed, and you queue up weapons and character abilities to unleash on your enemies. I'm using this as the example because it's one of our biggest features and it's something we're still iterating on. We're currently trying to figure out the best balance and flow between active and passive combat and what kind of information to communicate to the player. And here is the quick overview of the process we took to get here. So we have an idea that was developed in tandem with all disciplines. We then sent off the work to Marguerite, our UI designer, to do wireframes. And the UI work continues and gets passed along to me to integrate into the engine and iterate. And then I pass it off along to our programmer to implement and also iterate. And then together we test and iterate on the feature together. And it all leads to a functional prototype of the feature. But I'm just going to focus on the center part here of this workflow and of this shape, because this part here is where I have the most fun. This is where I get to learn new skills and I get to learn more about the engine. This is where I learn more about my teammate, how they work, and how programming works. And this is where we overcome technical challenges together. So starting with the first step here in this little circle is integrate and iterate. So this would be a part for the people in the UI team to keep things clean but also flexible, especially if it's something you're going to reuse in the future. While you're in here, there are some optimization things you can do, especially in Unity, and the easiest here being is unchecking the graphic raycaster for assets that don't need to be interacted with. And I would love to go on a tangent of UI optimization tips, but that's not what this talk is. So I recommend you go forth and search. Unity has a ton of resources, and I'm sure if you work in other engines, they have resources for you as well. And so what are the benefits of the UI team starting with integration first? The first is that it reduces workload for your programmer, and reducing workload for any teammate is going to already make them your BFF. Second is learning a new skill if it's new to you, or even if it's not new to you, you'll get to keep improving, and there's always something you can learn by doing this. Third is having a better understanding of UI creation for integration. So you'll better understand any possible technical limitations you might face when creating UI, and you can solve those problems through design early on. And the last here is you get experience working in the engine. This one is a really important skill to have if you're trying to set yourself apart in a competitive market, but it also gives you a better understanding and appreciation of how games are made. So now that the work is integrated, we're ready to move to the next step. How do we move smoothly from integrating to implementing? You need to hand over the work to the next person. So this part can take a lot of time and effort to communicate, but it is a major artery of the workflow here. A handover could look like a detailed message to your teammate, a design document, a Miro board, whatever you want it to be. However it looks, the goal it serves is to transfer ownership and authority of the work to the next person. A handover allows for productive siloing. Or, as my team likes to say, it's the trust high five between BFFs. So we'll jump into a video of our Miro board here, and here's how we started on the planning mode feature, ideating together and mapping out what the experience could be. We took the time to break down the needs of the player and also identify what we needed to communicate to them. Then we see Marguerite's work here with wireframes, and what I love about their work is that not only is this a communication to the team of the work that they did, but it was also a handover to me on what to integrate. And this is a part of the Miro board I reference a ton when I was working in Unity. And for my part, after integrating, I was ready to hand over my work to Ben, our programmer. I chose to do it via Slack messages instead, which is not as interesting, so I'm not going to show you that. But rather, I'll show you a handover I gave to Ben about a different feature. This one was focused on simplifying the HUD. So I used Miro and their talk tracks feature to record a video of myself talking about the work that I did. And for the HUD, we really stripped a lot of things back, which caused a lot of scripts to have missing components, and I wanted to notify Ben about that. There are also some things I wanted us to try out with enemy awareness and throttle lock, so here I'm taking liberty about features we've decided and just trying things out to test it, to see how it works. And lastly, I wanted to communicate to Ben the things that I broke in the UI, because UI designers are very good at breaking things in the engine. So why are handovers so cool and so important? First is that they open up a channel of communication. So instead of just committing your work and notifying to your team, my work here is done, you are opening the door for a conversation about that work. Next is that you're removing assumptions and giving clear directions, which means that work actually progresses more quickly. So instead of the programmer trying to figure out the best color to assign to a state, the exact hex code they need to use is there in the handover. And lastly, you are taking the time to make sure that your work makes sense to someone else. You are making your needs and next steps clear while also communicating where your team member has authority to make changes. And the last step in this little circle here is testing and iterating. So this is the part where we both play the game and share our feedback with each other and iterate as needed so that we can deliver a functional prototype. And the benefits of this stage is that it gives you a chance to actually test your work. I think we all have worked with that one chaotic but well-meaning person that makes changes to the game and commits them without testing. Taking the time to test what you did and testing if it works well with someone else's work ensures that your overall work is really strong and allows you to catch and fix bugs early on. Next is you get to bounce solutions off of each other. So if you're running into a technical limitations, it's so helpful to talk it through with your team member. More often than not, programmers have been able to help me solve a limitation I've faced by writing code, and vice versa, I've been able to save them time from writing code by using my UI integration knowledge. Next is celebrating successes and giving feedback. So this one's really fun. After we take a look at each other's work, it's so fun to be able to be like, wow, this thing that was just an idea is now in front of me and it's working. And likewise, if it's not working as intended, you have that open door to communicate that and help out with making changes. And lastly, refactoring and redesigning as you go. After all that feedback and collaboration and perhaps a little bit of time away from the work, it's good to take the time to review how you did something and have the autonomy to decide if it can be improved. All of this testing and iterating together leads to a functional, playable version of the game, which is what our goal was the entire time. So let's do a quick recap here on how to become BFFs. One is UI integration in the engine starts with the UI team. The second is the UI team passes the baton via a handover of the work to programmers. And lastly, we test, collaborate, and iterate together. So with that workflow nailed down, your programmer might say something like this about you at your next team reflection period. She set up so much UI in such a flawless way that I'm certain it halved the initial dev time of planning mode. So this is that workflow. This is where you can have the most fun, and this is where you can learn new skills and learn more about the engine. This is where you can learn more about your teammate, how they work, and how programming works. And this is where you can overcome technical challenges together. And lastly, this is where you become BFFs4EVA. So that's it. That's it, y'all. We have lots of time for questions. And there's a mic coming around.
Daunting. As the token non-UI person here, integration and implementation feels like this weird fuzzy gray area where they cross over in the Venn diagram. So I'm just wondering, where are you drawing the line between what you're doing and what you're handing over?
Basically, I draw the line at I can't program. So, but I can integrate things into the engine, and if there are any custom tools that our programmers have built, those are things I also know how to use. So I draw it, I guess, as I just want to push things forward as much as I can to the limitation where I hit where I can't actually make the thing work, but I can do as much of the setup as I can. And there's another question in the back.
Hello, you mentioned a UI team. So exactly who are the other team members?
It might just be you. But in my team, I have someone, Marguerite, who does more of the design work, the art and design, and they don't have experience in Unity, so that's where I step in, and I take any wireframes or mock-ups that they did, and I integrate that into Unity. In the previous experience, when I was on Jurassic World Alive, we had a small UI team, so it was myself and a senior UI artist, and then we had just a bunch of programmers, but we didn't have a specific UI programmer. So that team was just 2 people, but the 2 of us were quite technical. So we took everything from wireframes, mockups, to integrating it into the engine as well.
Okay, thank you.
Hello. As a UI artist, did you have any trouble convincing your team that you had design skills that it's useful to have you in that early stage, and possibly the programmer won't be the best person to kind of come up with the best flow? Did you ever have trouble convincing people that that's the case?
Could you reframe your question or ask it a little differently? Because I don't know if I understand.
Let's say, I guess in the waterfall way, it's expected that the designer designs it, the coder puts it in, and then the UI artist kind of dresses it.
Yes.
But in my experience as well, the UI artist kind of is a designer as well, and it's much more fruitful if they're earlier in the process, but some people might not believe that.
Yes.
Have you ever come to that friction point?
Yes, yeah, I have. So it's something I didn't dig too deep in this talk, but yeah, on my time on Jurassic World Alive, when I first joined, the way the team worked felt a little backwards to me because of exactly what you described. So that's something where I went to my lead and I let them know, hey, this type of working doesn't feel great. I would love if we could all be involved much earlier in the process. So after, I think, maybe a couple months of convincing leadership, the UI team was able to come on much early on to the point where features were just at the ideation stage, which was a really important place to be because we were able to help designers by making really, really rough wireframes, and we could prototype really quickly. And so before designs were even approved, we were able to have a really solid proof of concept. Whereas before it was just an idea that got approved, and then they were like, cool, now we're going to implement this idea. And then that's where we had a lot of friction. So yeah, I did have that experience, and I did push to get it changed because it didn't feel good, and then eventually it did change.
I had the exact same situation happen where almost to a T have the same process.
Yeah.
I'm like, it works so much better. So yeah, this talk's good. I agree with her. So
yay.
You talk about the relationship between the UI designer and the programmer. What are some ways to ease up the relationship between the UI artist and the designer so they're not drawing up these UIs that are just practically so hard to make?
So your question is about the relationship between game designers and UI artists?
Yeah.
Yeah, from my experience in UI, I have sort of felt, I don't know if stigma is the right word, but just the feeling of oh, you're a UI artist, so what do you know about design? You just do the art. And I just feel that's quite an unhelpful and kind of dangerous mindset to have. As someone who works in UI, it's our responsibility, whether you're an artist, a UI artist or a UI designer, they're all titles, but at the end of the day, if you care about UI, you care about design, you care about accessible design, and to me, UI is has both feet in the design team and in the art team. That's how I view it. I hope that helps answer your question. But yeah, I feel there should definitely be more collaboration. And if there's any I don't know, stigmas there or biases you have against a team member because they're just an artist, it's unproductive and unhelpful for the entire team. Because at the end of the day, we're all working together and collaborating, and we're just trying to get this game out of the door, So.
I suppose I was meaning more the when it comes to actually the visual side of it,
yeah,
to the functionality of it. How do you make sure that those going back and forth between making sure that
I see,
and the mechanical side of it as well?
I see. I think you'll get your answer from playtests. Your playtesters will tell you if something either is confusing because of how it was designed or confusing because of how it visually looks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm a UX designer, so I'm kind of at the start of this whole process. One thing that we've struggled with is time to go through that whole iteration process, and eventually it does just become waterfall. But is there a time that you've been doing this process with tight deadlines and you've found a way to get through the whole flow, even though there's like maybe a week to do something?
Yeah. So on Jurassic World Alive, because it was a live ops game, we had very tight deadlines. It was every 4 to 5 weeks we had a new update out. So we really didn't have the luxury to like keep iterating. I feel like the one thing with UI is like UI work never ends. You can always make it better, but at some point you have to call it. And I guess that's where your deadlines are gonna come in. But I think starting as early as you can, like the minute you have an idea for something, rather than keeping it just as words on a paper, like get it prototyped and see how that feels, rather than keeping like thinking about it. Just, I think once you start getting it working, once you have something tangible to hold and play with and interact with, I think that'll help you get that, make that time for it. But yeah, you're gonna have to call it at some point.
Of course, thank you.
Who wants to go first?
I think the person in the red, yeah, you shot up your hand like a millisecond faster.
Yeah, awesome talk.
Thank you.
Like, speaking my language. Kind of the teams I've worked on are similar to, it sounds like a lot of your experiences, where it's like you have a small team and you have to do things very quickly. We don't often like get any like time to make Unity tools. I'm just wondering what your experience with that is, if there's been any like really helpful tools as like a person integrating UI or like designing UI, if there's stuff where you're like, yes, this was like fantastic.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the luxuries of being in a very large team on a big IP, is that there are people who have the time to make you custom tools. But on Moon Candy, we're a very small team. We're 4, and at most we were 6 people. So we definitely don't have the time to make tools. I know on our like roadmap, we would love to get a tools programmer in, because it's just so important. And so many of the Unity UI things really suck. Like the UI documentation specifically, the Unity documentation specifically says to not use like vertical layout groups, but it's like, those are so handy sometimes. Why'd you make it if I can't use it? So I think the goal here would probably be just see what kind of tools are out there like on the marketplace, and see what you, like if there's a tool someone has made that you can use. That's kind of where we're at Moon Candy. We go and see what other things people have made out there that we can use in our game. But yeah, it would be an ideal world. In an ideal world, we could have a dedicated team member spend time doing that.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then one up here. I think this might be the last question. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
I was curious, how forward-thinking do you think you have to be for accessibility options in the UI design? So if you're going to have a small text versus large text, is that something you have to think about before integrating to be able to swap between those two assets? Or is that something that happens later on once you've kind of finalized the look?
Yeah, definitely as early as you can start for any sort of design. Like designing for accessibility, it's a small part of UX design. So it should always be on the back, like in the front of your mind, actually. You should always be thinking about accessibility because inclusive design is accessible design for everybody. Yeah, so your question was when to start it early on. Yeah. Cool, yeah, we have one more minute, so we can do one more question.
When it comes to your UI design, have you ever had to deal with other languages where it's suddenly the UI needs to say something different in a different language and it needs to fit? And what's your experience with that?
Like for localization?
Yeah.
Yeah. So on Jurassic World Alive, I did have to design with localization in mind. And the cool thing was we had a custom tool made, so I could swap languages, which was really handy because you have to think about you have to be really have a microscope and look at everything, because there are certain languages where you have to have a custom line height so that the characters don't overlap. And there were some instances where I actually had to change the design I made to accommodate for let's say 2 lines of text instead of 1. And another option there, if you can't change the visual design, is to reach out to the people doing the localization and seeing if they can shorten the text, or whatever kind of changes they can make to accommodate. If you're this needs to be 1 line for sure, you could reach out to them to adjust the text.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone for coming. I'm happy to chat some more afterwards. Yeah, if you want to talk. I really appreciate you being here.